Well, hello there. I finally got a chance after watching that extraction and feeding process to sit down with the owner-operator of AGRITOXINS, Jack Facente. And Jack, I got a few questions for you today, if you'd be so obliged.
Sure, David. Go ahead.
Well, first off, tell us a little about yourself.
Well, I started dabbling in the snake collecting hobby as a young guy, about 7 years old, and we grew up in South Florida, and we would go out hunting anything we could find: rat snakes, rattlesnakes, water moccasins, occasional pine snake, and of course then we could get indigos. They were prevalent and they were neat. And as I became interested in that part of animals, which by the way was brought on, my parents bought me a dog when I was young, and I turned out to have hay fever allergies to the dog, so they got rid of the dog. The doctor said get rid of the dog, and they replaced the dog with a book on turtles and snakes and amphibians. That's what led to the collection in the neighborhood of these critters we were looking at. All my buddies, we look in a book and we try to go catch it. And one thing led to another. And of course, in the 60s, Bill Haast was in his heyday with a Miami Serpentarium, and everybody looked up to Bill. I mean, Bill was, he was the god of snakes, of venom, of everything. And, you know, we all idolized him, and rightfully so, because he was a leader in his role here. What he played with venom production, venom research, and husbandry. So I always wanted to go to work there. And of course it was about 20 miles away, so I needed to have transportation. So when I was 16, I got my driver's license of my first car. I went to work for him on weekends and still stayed in high school.
All right.
From that point, make a long story short, I was collecting venom and importing snakes. I had my own little import business. I was bringing snakes in from Australia, snakes in from Thailand, and I was collecting venom in my backyard. And then I got some king cobras and was also collecting that venom in my backyard on a picnic table, would put it on ice and carry it down to Bill that same day and sell him the raw venom by the ounce, if you will. At probably about a quarter an ounce, and it gave me something to do, and I just became more interested, and I always wanted to get into venom production. And as we got out of high school, went in the Army, met a few folks in there, Herschel Flowers in Vietnam, did some hunting myself in Vietnam, went to Thailand and shipped some pretty big snakes back to Bill, actually one of the biggest king cobras. It was almost 18 feet that he'd ever had. And also in Vietnam, went into Thailand on a 10-day leave. We were going to build a snake collection, venom collection lab there for the rotostoma, the Malaysian pit viper. At that point in time, Abbott Laboratories was doing a very significant study and working on a drug with that venom. And it was cheaper to do it there than here. And as it turned out, Abbott pulled the plug when they reached a certain point of investment, said no more, and shut that off. So never went to Thailand and built a serpentarium with Bill. Shortly after that point, my wife and I moved up here to St. Cloud. And she's been my partner with this business and been by my side through all this for 49 years now, Sally. And George and I moved up here to build Reptile World Serpentarium in '73, and we built it, and we knew that we would be, you know, liquid gold, rich snake farmers and doing well. And boy, was that a rude awakening, and we'll get more into that later, I'm sure. But Reptile World got going, and I had to work with a telephone company to feed the family and pay the bills, and George at that point actually was drilling wells to pay his bills. And we did the venom production deal. We partnered with Bill Haast. He came up here. We almost started another serpentarium up here with him. Bill was going to name it Fahava Laboratories for Facente, Haast, Van Horn, and he only had it termed in that sequence because it's the only way the three names put together sounded good. And we got right to the point of almost doing it, but it just never panned out. So stayed with George until about '94, going down at nights, early in the morning, still working at the phone company. And then in '94, I had to break away from it for a little bit. The telecommunication industry just took hold and was sending me out of town a bunch. So kind of stayed in the reading and the studying part, became very interested in toxinology, snake bite treatment, symptomology, venoms, and just, you know, when I was a kid, if you found an article on venoms once every 3 or 4 months, it was exciting. Today you can find 10 a week it's just blown wide apart with genetics and everything else that's going on. So from that point, got away out of it for a little bit, and then in 2009, got back into it with AGRITOXINS. I formed here. George needed some help producing 100 grams of coral snake venom for Pfizer Pharmaceutical to produce an anti-venom, which has been outdated since Wyeth went out of business in 2008. And the three venom production laboratories in Florida, MedToxin, Carl Barden, George Van Horn, Reptile World, Biotoxins, and myself, which is specifically, I just do coral snakes, got together and collaborated to do this. It's been a hard thing to do because we could barely get enough snakes, and as you'll see in some of the videos, the amount of venom that a coral snake delivers is just not even enough to run down the test tube. It's very small. It is very toxic, and that got us to this point. So I've been doing this specific coral snake husbandry and venom production since 2009.
All right, so you're from Florida, correct?
Yes.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about growing up in Florida as a youth and kind of what's changed since then? I'm a Florida native myself, and every time I come back home, it's just astounds me how much the state has changed. So if you want to give us a little insight.
Well, unfortunately, from a perspective of hunting snakes, of course, the population in Florida has pretty much, in my estimation, devastated a lot of the snake populations, comparatively speaking. We could go out as kids and we could always go out and catch rattlesnakes, eastern diamondbacks, pygmy rattlesnakes, water moccasins, yellow rat snakes, red rat snakes, just about any king snakes. I mean, when you go king snake hunting, you know, around Lake Okeechobee on 27, you go out and you do good, catch 15 or 20 in the morning. You could go out on Mud Dam, you could go out on 41, and you could catch 40, 50, 60, 70 rat snakes a day. And indigos down around Key Largo and around the base, all around South Florida, they were, you know, pretty populous too. You could always catch an indigo or two. And red rats, you could go up around the Palm Beaches and catch them. We would go into bridges, we'd go into pump houses, we'd climb trees, we'd go underneath the bridges. And today, you're hard pressed to do that. Number one, you can't even hardly find an indigo. They're such a beautiful big snake that require a lot of terrain to live and reproduce. So they're not extinct, but they're approaching that. The other snakes, if you go out and catch 2 or 3, you're doing good. And you can't go to many different spots now. It's very pinpointed. It's secret places that nobody tells you about. Hard to catch snakes in Florida, even though there's a lot of vacant land still around. It's different. The other things that are different, there weren't really laws back then when we were kids. Today you need a venomous permit to possess a venomous snake, to catch it, to pick it up, to transport it. And you need 1,000 hours per family to get the full blown permit in Florida. You need 5,000 hours of experience that has to be ascertained by mentoring with somebody. And so it's a different animal. It's a different game. But Florida, I will say, has some of the strictest and best regulations in place to protect the public.
All right, so you mentioned a little bit earlier that you were in the Army during Vietnam. You were in country, correct? Yes. All right, so you said you landed around Tet Offensive time, right?
Yeah, I got there right after the real bad 68 Tet Offensive and was there for the 69 Tet Offensive. That was an experience. I had all these visions going over. George and I worked together at the Miami Serpentarium. In fact, that's where we met. And he kind of cued me into what to expect because he had been over there and came back. So I had a little bit of understanding of what to expect going over there. But I knew there were king cobras there, and I knew there were elephants up in the highlands, and I had all these expectations of really seeing a lot of neat herps over there. And I caught a few. Never saw a king. I caught some of the Malaysian pit vipers, the rotostoma, caught some blind snakes, caught a couple of rat snakes. That's about it. Never saw a python. Never saw any kind of python over there. It was, by the time I got there, I guess it was pretty much decimated with Agent Orange and defoliated, and we were a little more concerned with, other things going through the jungle. However, that's when I did get over to Thailand with some great friends. Sufin and Pets were a great importer, a friend that I would get stuff before I went in, and I got to spend some time with them. We went out and captured an elephant. I got to go through all of their collections of stuff and send a lot of stuff back. That was kind of neat, a part of my trip over there. And did get away to Hawaii and met my wife over there for an R&R. Of course, there's no snakes in Hawaii, so we couldn't do much there. But all in all, it was a good experience.
I know my deployment, I was deployed in Al Palace in Iraq during Operation Iraqi Freedom, and I was kind of stuck on the fob, so I didn't have a lot of good war stories. I think my best one ever is when I was pulling guard duty one day, and rats would just infest this place, and a giant rat fell in the trap at my feet, and we went out and fed it to carp. So that's my most exciting wartime story. Do you have anything exciting that happened to you while you were there?
Well, you know, a lot of that, you tend to want to remember the good parts and you don't remember the bad parts. Part of my tour, I was a bulldozer operator, 62 E20, so I spent a lot of time initially on top of a D7E Caterpillar dozer, which had a really strong belly pan, and you could hit a landmine with that, and other than the only damage I took was my hearing. But, you know, it was a lot of noise, but you were protected. Then they moved me into a battalion where I was a commo chief because of my telephone background. So got me out of my MOS, and that's where we got into a little more deeper into the country and into the jungles, if you will, which had its good points and bad points. But again, frankly, I think every young man or every young woman that wants to experience the world that's offered in the military services today, that by the way, from what I hear, is a little harder to get into. Back then it was a draft, and you know, you wake up one morning and you're thinking, you don't know, you can't plan your life because you don't know what next week's going to bring. So I finally got fed up with that. I said, I'm going to go volunteer draft, and I went down, volunteered, and I knew when I was going and could plan around it, and went and worked out okay.
Yeah, it's all volunteer now, so they can be a little more selective about things, but yeah, and they definitely tightened up the ship on that because they don't need as many people now, and
right.
And war is changing with UAVs and all other things that technology brings around. So yeah, it is a lot different. You want to tell us a little bit about your career in telecom, or?
Well, the career in telecom spanned over 40 years and 6 months, and started out in the mailroom. Actually started out in the mailroom when I got out of high school, and then got the call that I could go to work for Bill full-time instead of just on a weekend. So I quit the telephone company and went to work for Bill down to Miami Serpentarium, which is where I met George. And you know, that was an interesting job. It was a lot of cleaning bowls and a lot of cleaning cages and a lot of killing rats and a lot of freezing rats, and just, you know, didn't work for Bill and handle venomous snakes per se. At that point, he was the only one that did it due to, I'm sure, insurance and other, you know, regulatory issues. He just couldn't afford to do it. And the only way you could learn, he did let us watch the extractions. He would let us watch every extraction. And just by visually watching, and that's kind of how you learned and you figured out how you wanted to try to do it. So you know, that was kind of a neat thing there.